Everybody. So you see the little notification that you got there that this is, we're going to record the rest of the session today. So just so you're aware of that. And if you want to turn off your camera or whatever, please feel free to do so. So yeah, I don't know, so you had a little chance there to meet hopefully somebody new and talk about, we don't have a lot of time to share in the big group, but maybe we could hear from one or two people about what you talked about in your group and maybe what you noticed about your experiences. Would anyone like to share with the larger group?
Amy, I can. It's Jean. Unless you don't want me to. Well, I could wait for somebody else to.
Yeah, well, let's see if there's anyone else who wants to share.
Yeah.
And if not, but since we're gonna all get a chance to talk, is there anyone else out there? Any other brave soul?
Hi, I will speak because I met two phenomenal undergraduate students in social work. So hi, everyone. It's great to see everyone today. I met Emily and I also met Melissa, and they are both social work students at Southern, and we just discussed really our interests were, in the field of social work, but also interests in research in that world. And so we just got to know each other and talked about the pros and cons of research versus practice, and the different experiences, I should say, as opposed to pros and cons, the different experiences in that work. So it was wonderful to meet them, and they said it's their first time coming to this meeting, and I got to share that I am a veteran, I've been coming to QRDG for forever. So
Claudia,
it's been really wonderful.
Share with us who were you when you were an undergraduate? Did you have this interest in research as an undergrad?
So that was the beautiful thing about our conversation, because I was able to talk about how I've, been in, I'm an LPC, so I'm a licensed, professional counselor, and also that I too was in I was a practitioner for 10 plus years and then transitioned to research. And so that experience and just trying to navigate when you're one-on-one, well, for me, I was working inside schools. I was in Newark, New York City, et cetera. When you're inside schools, you can see the impact of your work progress. And when you transition to research, as much as I love research, it's sometimes a little bit more challenging because the impact of your, you're able to have a greater impact on a greater number of people, but you're not always able to see it and have that connection with every single person that you're impacting. So sometimes you don't even know.
Yeah, so as we move across our careers, we have different relationships with research. We go in and out, we see the values and the different ways it might complement our practice. But just going back to just taking this moment here and talking about undergraduates, I just invite all of us to really bring ourselves back to that moment when we were 20 years old and we were an undergraduate, and the ways in which we saw the world and saw ourselves, the stories that we told ourselves and others about who we were and who we might become. Because that is the group that we're trying to engage with through this work. Did anyone else, thank you, Claudia, for sharing your conversation today with Emily and Melissa. Did anyone else want to share any other reflection that came up in their group in terms of specifically, who were you in college, and was research on your radar at that time in your life? Do you even know that person? Do you remember who that was? I mean, it's so I mean, maybe Jean, I know you have a little story to tell, so maybe you could just you were going to share something earlier. I mean, sort of reflections on your undergraduate self.
I was just going to reflect on how Teresa, who was my partner in the breakout room, who's at Northeastern University now and is much younger than me, we had similar experiences. I don't really remember my younger self that well because it was 40 years ago when I went to college this year. And but we both were first generation students, college students in our families, not knowing how to navigate college. And she had research experience, I didn't, but we also had some practical experience that was the same. And I think if I think about it for myself, research, if I broaden the definition of research, then I I think there was an exploration project that I did, if that makes sense, you know, learning new things. We both volunteered at domestic women's shelters, and I had to do a project on that, which was sort of research based. But what I thought was interesting is she had a lot more. She went to Smith College. I don't know why I'm telling you her story, but
Totally
and
fine.
maybe Teresa, you want to talk about it too. The different experience. I went to another state school in Connecticut, which was primarily teaching. So there wasn't a lot of research opportunity. But Teresa, you want to talk for like a minute, like a little bit about your experience at Smith?
Yeah, so I ended up, when I went to Smith, I knew I was interested in psychology. So I started there, and as part of the curriculum there at the time, I was there about 15 years ago, but as part of the curriculum, they have like an empirical research class that you take. And I ended up being like super interested during that class, and then reached out to the professor and got involved on one of their projects because they tend to integrate students into their research. And then I also was simultaneously taking sociology courses. And that's when I took a qualitative research class and just fell in love and learned all about ethnography. And in that curriculum, there was definite like research projects that we were doing, and doing some, you know, little qualitative projects. So that was my first dose of it. I had wanted to do research after college, but wasn't able to get a position for quite some time. So I ended up doing case management for about 5 years. And then I found myself at Yale and ended up as a research associate for a number of years.
So it's interesting. Thank you for sharing that story and the ways in which seeds were planted both through your experiences with professors, certain courses, certain work experiences. So as we go, thank you all everyone who spoke up today. And I think as we go through these slides, you know, just noticing and remembering as we talk about undergraduates, obviously these are human beings, right? And we were once undergraduates. What can we learn? You know, in many ways, perhaps our experiences as undergraduates are reflective of students today, and in many ways is very, very different, right? So our experience both informs and maybe disguises maybe some of the things that we should be looking for today. So let me just start by talking a little bit about, you know, the pipeline, the PhD pipeline, and the challenges that we face in diversifying academia and scientific knowledge building. I think this information probably is known to many of you, but I want to just take a minute to really sit with this data and see it. On this slide, which comes from the US Census, there are two numbers. If you start with the green Latino column, the first number, you know, is 100 students. So 54 earn a high school diploma, 51, that's gender, right? So the first gender is man, second gender is women, right? So it's a binary gender categories there. And so that's how you can read this chart. That's why there's two numbers. So you can see here the disparities by race, right? And so seeing the ways in which students of color, well, Latinos, African Americans, and Native Americans have less success in moving towards through this pipeline towards a PhD. Asian Americans have greater success, or have similar or more than white people who identify as white. And interesting to note that this is sort of the same across, I mean, there's some differences, but across types of disciplines, right? So in psychology and social sciences, which is what I've highlighted there with that red bar, you can see that the doctoral degrees earned in 2019 were disproportionately among white people, which is interesting to notice given that so many of our disciplines and professions have a foundational commitment to social justice and racial equity. But it's not, that is a talk that we make, but it's not actually showing up in our own homes, in our own businesses, which is the business of creating knowledge and teaching students. So just noticing that similarity across disciplines. Here we see gendered diversity in terms of men and women, which is interesting to notice the ways in which in recent years, women are more successful in or are more likely to be earning degrees, undergraduate, master's, and PhD level. You see more women at Southern. Our university is about 60% women, and that's typical of a lot of universities. So this raises the question about men and sort of trying to understand these gender differences. Also noticing that these numbers reflect the people who earned PhDs in 1 year. So this is 16, 17 year. It doesn't reflect sort of who has a PhD at the university, right? So these are the new folks coming up, but I think, you know, we probably see a predominance or at least an equal number of men in terms of like who's already at this location. But just noticing these gender differences as well in the new students coming up. So when we look at these disparities, you know, again, why, just to make the argument about why we care and why this matters, right? So this is a image that I borrowed from a blog, and you can see I've cited there the person who made this art, talking about how language barriers influence academic and social life for Vietnamese students at a university in Australia. And so you see the student there who is able to speak in their own language, but not or when they're speaking in English, they're not communicating the full beauty and depth of their knowledge that lives in their imagination. And I think really for research, it's a similar type of thing, because research is a language, an academic way of communicating. And so many of our students have the power and the knowledge and the creativities and the ideas, but they're just not practiced in expressing them in sort of a research pathway. And so we are losing all of that beauty and that knowledge by our inability to access those bubbles there. Is just hurting our own ability to learn about the world and to create better programs for the people that we serve. This image speaks to the same issue and makes that argument about why we need full equity and representation in science, the ways in which it enriches our society, creates better science by having more people at the table, more creativity, less bias, creating more effective translation, which is a key part of CIRA's mission, and that dissemination, being able to share science in a way that speaks to the broad public, and creating also an improved workforce environment, and just knowing the benefits of what it is to work at a university that has a truly diverse cast of characters, not just with the students, but throughout the faculty, the PhD students, and what that brings to productivity and just positivity and accountability, reducing of harassment, all these things. So I think this is a wonderful chart that really illustrates the multifaceted benefits of this project. So when we think about so those are sort of the social levels. On an individual level, when we think about the undergraduates, what are some of the benefits to an undergraduate? So we're talking about the social benefit, or the society at large. But if we were speaking to an undergraduate student about the benefits of being engaged in research, what are some of the things you might offer? Like, what are some ideas? Let's just do a little brainstorm. You could use the chat feature, or you could speak up. What are some of the benefits for undergraduates of engaging in research during their college undergraduate experience? Chat or just speak up.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for leading this discussion. One thing that I think is really helpful when working with people that don't have a lot of research experience is that they often shake us out of our patterns and question why we do things. And it's like, oh, I've just always done it that way, or that's how I was taught. And I feel like sometimes that new perspective can be real helpful to make us kind of reflect on.
Right. Absolutely. And that goes to the other slide that we just showed, thank you for amplifying that point. And here, what I'm inviting us to consider is so those are the benefits for the team, for the PI, for whatever, but what about for that individual undergraduate? What is the benefit for them of moving into this sort of unknown pathway. What is the benefits for them to be in this type of research position?
I think being able to generate hypotheses and using sort of background knowledge in the form of theories, or learning how to understand and think, how to reason with new information, and how to test quote unquote hypotheses, whether in an empirical statistical way or just through other methods. But I think the idea of like hypotheses and hypothesis testing can be really helpful, just
Absolutely.
Overall.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And that sort of speaks to one of these. Let me just show you the list that we have here from the research. That speaks to this idea of boosting their GPA, right? So the skills, the analytical skills that you're describing that they're learning as part of a research project may allow them to develop critical thinking and analysis skills that allow them to do better in school. Also, being on a research project is a way for them to build their resume, to create sort of a unique way of telling the story of what they did in college. It's a great networking opportunity, right? To work alongside staff and faculty outside of the classroom. And also to get those really good professional letters of recommendation. I can say as a faculty member, I get probably between 20 and 30 requests every year for students to write them MSW letters of recommendation, which I do enthusiastically, and I'm happy to do that. But often I only know the student from being in one class, and I can't really describe who they are. I can write sort of generically and try to be specific, but whereas a student who's worked with me for a couple of years, I have all types of depth, and that's just going to be a richer, better letter. So these are some of the ways that it's beneficial for students to be in this type of work. And this slide, I think also from Cal State Monterey, is very interesting, showing that when students are involved in research, their ability to earn they're not more likely to go to grad school, because a lot of BSW students go to get their MSW anyway. That doesn't change, but it does change if this I think is a stunning picture, that students who have research experience as undergrads are much more likely to earn that doctorate, because they can be in those spaces and envision themselves in that work. So what do you think are some of the barriers for faculty? Like when you think about a faculty person, oh, would you like to have an undergrad work on your project? We've talked about some of the benefits of having the students there, but what do you think might be some of the resistance or things you've heard from your colleagues about, well, I'm not sure if I want to have an undergraduate research assistant? What are some of the barriers for faculty engaging in this work? And again, you can put it in the chat, or you can speak.
I think that sometimes faculty aren't aware of the capacity or the unique contributions that undergraduates can bring, and it can seem daunting to train undergraduates, recognizing that they come with a breadth of different experiences and capacities. So it could be a little bit intimidating, I think, to work with undergraduates, particularly as at the doctoral level, we have a lot, we're kind of talking about here, we're forgetting where we came from in terms of being at that level. I think there's a little bit of a block, especially when we have such a workaholic culture to get things done. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that. So the question is, how much training is this student going to work? And so when we cling to the white supremacy notions of productivity, and all the overwork culture of academia, the idea that a student might slow you down, that is a true thing. That may be true, but it may also that you end up with a better project, thinking of those bubbles in the first image. So how do we incentivize that? And so here's a list of some of the things Karen was talking about. This again from the research about why faculty hesitate to take undergrad to enter into this mentorship. Worried that students aren't going to be able to commit, the knowledge base, which is what Karen was just speaking of, that do they know? and also maybe not having money to pay the students, or feeling like they should have a course release for the mentorship, which may or may not be available at their school. Also the idea of what you're researching, is it suitable for undergrads? And then finally that career progress thing, is this going to slow me down? Is this going to get me off track in some way? So thinking about these are real barriers for faculty as well. So for students, they do, however, really rely on professors to learn about research opportunities. That is often the gateway for them into this work. And so some of the barriers for students, which we're going to talk about today, are, just the lower rates of participation in undergraduate research. It's challenging for first generation students who have income insecurity, food insecurity, transfer students who are juggling a lot of complicated schedules, adult learners and caregiving responsibilities, students of color who are going to school and living in the face of structural racism and negotiating their day-to-day survival, Pell-eligible students who again have limited resources. So these are different barriers we're going to be talking about. So in talking about some of the barriers, so what I wanted to, now that we've sort of discussed the benefits and some of the barriers, move to talking about reflections on practice and some work we're doing at Southern to try to address these issues that we've underscored here. So I'm so happy to share with this group, especially my CIRA family here, that I was recently awarded an R15 grant, and I call the grant Sean, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But the R15, for people who are not familiar with it, is a grant that is designed to do small scale research at institutions that's primary goal is to provide undergraduate education and don't have a lot of research support, less than $6 million a year. And when you look at the main goals of the R15, one, to support research. So absolutely, we're doing a research project. Second, to expose students to research. Third, to strengthen the capacity of the institution to do research. So 2 out of the 3 are not the research, but the pipeline. And so this is really a pipeline project. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So SHAWN is an acronym. It stands for Stop HIV/AIDS Women's Network. It is an R15 from NIDA, NIH. And so, as probably most of you know, this project is named in honor of our colleague, Sean Lang, who passed away last year. So I have to get good at talking about this without getting emotional about it. But then again, they're just emotions. They're not trying to sell me life insurance. So all I can say is Sean was, for those of you who didn't know her, a mentor and leader for so many of us in the state of Connecticut, a harm reduction warrior, an HIV activist, and a teacher and a mentor, I think, in so many deep and important ways. So I talked about hanging out in the hallway with Jean at one of the conferences, and Sean for sure. I can remember one story from her. We were at a HIV conference somewhere, and we shared a room, because neither of us really had money for the event or whatever. So we were sharing a room. And I will tell you that we stayed up all night in that hotel room, drinking wine and talking about the nonprofit organization we would create to bring harm reduction and social justice to women at risk for HIV in Connecticut. That's what we talked about. That was what we were dreaming of. And I think in some ways, in many ways, this project is a reflection of that dream and that vision that she had. And I love her very much. And I know a lot of you do too. So it's such an honor to name this project after her. And there's a whole collaborative up in Hartford that's working on her with John Bonelli and her friends and family in thinking about how to carry forth her legacy. So I talked to them about this project, and they embraced the idea of having me name it after her. So this is in conjunction with that larger effort to make her legacy, to celebrate it and to fight like hell for the living. So that's Sean. So the other thing, speaking about Sean and also just honoring Mark Kinsley, who we also lost, in the last couple of days, who was a member of the CIRA family and like a friend and colleague of Sean's and of many of us, and a warrior, a harm reduction warrior. because really these principles that Mark and Sean really brought home, and so many of the team members at CIRA, about harm reduction. It is these principles of harm reduction that inform my work with undergraduates. So I come to this work, I am not necessarily a faculty member and a teacher, I'm a community organizer and an HIV activist. That is who my core person is, and that is how I teach. And so these are the principles of harm reduction that come from the website of the organization that, our national organization that Mark was affiliated with. It's sort of, some of them are cut and paste and some of them I kind of changed the wording a little bit, but these are the principles and the ways in which I feel like we need to meet undergraduates in the research project the same way we meet people who use drugs. Meeting people where they are, being non-judgmental, any level of engagement is better than no engagement. Understanding that engagement in research is complicated and people are coming from different places. Understand that undergrads, if we're going to do a project about undergrads, they have to have a real voice in the research opportunity. And recognizing, and this is a quote from their website, but I just put research where they had drug users, recognizing that the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, past trauma, sex-based discrimination, and other social inequalities affect people's vulnerability to and capacity to engage in research. So wherever they are, and we had the CIRA talk a few weeks ago about the Bridge Clinic in Boston, which was such a wonderful presentation and really helped me think about this in so many different ways. And that doctor who worked in the Bridge Clinic, what she said is when someone who uses drug comes into their clinic, every staff member, the answer to every question is yes. Yes, I can make that happen. And I think that's also how we have to meet undergraduates. Yes, you can work 2 hours a week. Yes, you can only do it on Zoom. Yes, just trying to make this possible and in this harm reduction way. So it's low threshold. I took that from the Bridge Clinic, low threshold research team. Okay, so this is the team, me, I'm Amy, we have the 5 undergraduates, a lot of them are here today, Melissa, Emily, Melody, these are our undergraduates working on this project also, Nicole, Maeve, and Stephanie. We have a nice group of students working with us. We have 2 community consultants, Maribel and Nadine, both of them are graduates of Southern. Nadine got her BSW and MSW, Maribel got her MSW. They're both practicing social workers in New Haven who started their research careers at Southern with me doing research projects. So they have that experience as being a student researcher, and they now have an active practice with people who use drugs, formerly incarcerated people, and people at risk for HIV. There are also people who are from Bridgeport and New Haven who have personal lived experience and have been impacted by criminal justice systems. And so they are our two community consultants. Jamie Myers, okay, sorry I spelled her name wrong there, which is something I have to work on. It's Jamie Meyer, 2 E's, no S, okay, as you know. She's our clinical expert, and also in collaboration with Pam Allen, who runs reentry housing for women in New Haven called the Evergreen. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into the science of it, but I want to just briefly describe what the project Sean is about. The main research question is, what is the impact of COVID-19 shifts on criminal legal practices on the HIV risk behaviors of justice-involved women who use drugs? But you can see here the 3 aims. The first aim is to provide undergraduate students with the opportunity to gain significant experience in community-engaged research, right? So that's the first aim, that's the pipeline. And then number 2, identify the pre-COVID risks, HIV risk and protective factors for justice-involved women who use drugs. This is a body of knowledge that I think we already kind of know, life histories about women in this this population, but this will be a wonderful practice for the students, and there's always opportunity for new learning to do life history interviews. And then the final aim, which I think is more of the discovery piece here, is looking at documenting and assessing HIV risk during COVID-19 and really just understanding what were women's lives like in Connecticut during the epidemic, which is still, as you know, lingering among us. The whole thing was inspired by this picture. Well, by hallway conversations with Sean, but also by this picture here, which shows the number of incarcerated women in Connecticut over the last 10 years. So you can see it's about 1,000 people, 1,200 people, 1,000, 1,200, then it goes down a little bit. And then when COVID hits in 2020, we go from 800 to 500, 525, something like that at the lowest. And so there was this dramatic drop because people were not being incarcerated. There was the police, the judges, probation were operating with a different level of discretion, which kept people from entering the prison. So there was a huge drop in the number of women serving less than a year, kind of our jail population. So the question is, what happened to those folks? We hear jail saved my life. Well, what if there was no jail? You know, what happened to those women who were not incarcerated for 6 months for sex work? Like, what happened to them? You know, what were their lives like? So that's the question. And this is an urgent public policy issue because today we've got about 700 women in New York. So this number is going up and probably will be back at the 1,000. And that's a shame and a disgrace because we have shown that we can lower this number, and our inability to hold on to that change is disappointing to me. And so I'm hoping we can provide some evidence to help with that. So this, you know, we can share the slides later or whatever, but basically we're spending the whole first year of this project is about engaging students and community. So we're not going to start collecting data till next year. This is a year for the students to learn about HIV, to learn about drug use, to learn about community. All of our students are from Connecticut, they're from our community, but they may not know these aspects of the community, right? So doing community-based research requires an engagement up front, and then doing the work and disseminating it. So, you know, as you know, this is our qualitative research group. This is a qualitative project, and I'm really proud to have a 100% qualitative project funded by NIH. It's community engaged research. So the community engaged research piece, as I described, is tricky with students, right? Because we know that community-based research can't be like, oh, here you are, go interview a bunch of people and then leave. That's what we're trying to avoid. But how do we create time and space for our students to really enter in a way? Because what I don't want to say to a student is, oh, you're doing community-based research, when really what they did was fly in and fly out, right? So that's not teaching the you know, that's setting a bad standard. So that's why we have this whole year of going to reentry council meetings, going to Ryan White meetings, spending time with community. We have some lit reviews on the horizon. You know, academic writing and reading is always a challenge for all of us. And for undergraduates who have less practice, this can be very time consuming. Again, we know that, you know, our fetish with the written word is a reflection of white supremacy culture. However, we are in that world right now. And so we do need to write, we do need to publish. And so getting those writing skills, those lit review skills moving is part of this project. And then finally, we have 3 different qualitative methods that we're using in this study. The point being that we're trying to allow the students to try a bunch of different methods and see what qualitative work is. So they're doing life history interviews, they're doing calendar-based interviews, and they're doing digital storytelling, which is sort of a type of photo voice initiative. All of these different ways, we're trying to give them sort of a smorgasbord of qualitative methods, which will also be a triangulation of our knowledge building through those different methods. So it's a deeply qualitative project. Also, I won't get too far into this, but we are using rapid qualitative inquiry, and I put the citation there. If you're not familiar with it, you can pick up the book. But the reason why I chose this is because this approach to qualitative work is very team-based and iterative, and I felt like it really aligned with our teaching goals. So basically, it's a team. You have 2 people do every interview, and that's not because this is an R15 Sean project. It's that's the method. And so basically I'll do 3 interviews with the student watching, then they'll do 3 interviews with me, you know, observing and taking notes, so that it has that opportunity to learn. Our QI also has this scheduled block thing where you kind of pause every 5 interviews and talk about what you've learned. It's the rapid analysis. Do you want to change the instrument? So I think that will allow for close mentorship. And so I'm really excited about this. Also, we need to bring this information out because COVID is happening now. The number of women at York is going up every day. So we need this rapid approach. So, you know, we started this summer, we got the grant in May, and the students are here. So, you know, we can hear from them during the Q&A and stuff. All of the things that are in the literature are in the room with us in the summer, right? So all of the challenges that we face, these are real things, and I don't have a solution for them, just an intention to try to move forward in a harm reduction way. You know, a lot of our students are first-generation college students, which means They are new to the university environment. They may have pressures. I don't mean this specifically the students who work with me, but just in general, first generation students may have pressures to get jobs and make money and support their family and support themselves, right? They are the golden one. They're the one who's made it to college. They're the leader of their family. Sometimes they're the person in their family who speaks English the best. You know, they're translating. I mean, there's different ways that this impacts students. And this to me is something that I kind of struggle with, because in terms of the pipeline, it's like, I'm bringing the student into this pipeline. I'm going to have them do PhD work, take this debt, go to all these schools. And when they come to Southern as an assistant professor, they will be hired for $67,500. That will be their starting salary with their PhD, with their master's, you know, knowing that with their master's, they could go straight into practice and make much more than that much quicker, you know? So when there is a financial privilege to being in academia, and that I find tricky to negotiate and just be honest with students about. A lot of our students are negotiating life with low income. They've got to work, they have other jobs. They, you know, it just makes it hard. If your car's not working, maybe you don't have a car, you share a car. These are all, having a low income makes it harder to be always where you're supposed to be and be on time. And it also makes you tired. You have different jobs, you have different competing responsibilities. You may also experience housing insecurity, food insecurity, and things like that. Family caregiving responsibilities, you know, our students who are adult students, or even if they're traditional age, you know, this is the family, right? It's the sister, it's the cousin, it's the, you know, I mean, I'll never forget one of my earlier days at Southern. We were doing like, I was teaching a class, and a student came up to me and said that she had to miss the presentation, which was like a large part of her grade and stuff. And she wasn't able to come because she had to skip class because she had to do her sister's hair for prom. And, you know, at the time I was like, you know, but now upon reflection, I realized, you know, that was a rite of passage. That was a moment in her family's life that she needed to be present for, you know? And so how can we accommodate people's different schedules? I didn't go to prom. I don't really do my hair, but that's my culture, you know, and people have different cultures, different family setups. And so, and I just love this picture because really any of these people could be a Southern student. Well, not the little ones, not yet, but the adults you see, all different ages, younger people, middle-aged, older age, we have all these students at Southern. So any member of this family could be in our project. And then racism and other forms of oppression, which obviously impact people of color and low income people every day in every way. And so this is the exhaustion that goes with living in a white supremacy culture. And so these are real things when we talk about engaging students of color. And also just talking about these problems of HIV and drug use, which disproportionately impact communities of color. And it's a lot of information, which is very personal and brings, you know, very personal. It's not just the scientific view, it's members of the family and community. So it's a heavier burden to carry. So again, these are the lessons from harm reduction that I talked about before, especially given all the slides I just went through about the different challenges that we face. I'm not going to go through the list again, but if you know Mark, you know, hear his voice in your ear right now, you know the talk that he would give. And I just want to say, Mark, I hear you. And I'm bringing that framework to my project of teaching. And I just hope that Mark and Sean will give me some grace, have some patience with me as we move through this complicated project. So now we want to just shift a little bit and have Jean, my colleague who I spoke about earlier, was here today, talk about the work. You know, Jean has been, as I described, a mentor to me in many ways. And one of the ways is her leadership around engaging undergraduates in research, which is just something again and again and again that I have witnessed her do. And this is without an R15 and without all the bells and whistles, but just doing the work and making it happen. So, and also, you know, Jean is a CIRA affiliated scientist. She's an HIV activist, a sexual health advocate, and a member of the CIRA family. So it's so great to see the ways that she's brought young people at our campus into this project of ending HIV in our country or in around the world. So Jean, can I turn the mic over to you?
Yes. I would love to single-handedly end HIV in the world, but that's probably not going to happen. Amy, thank you so much. You probably couldn't see the comments coming through, but people really, really engaged with what you just had to say, and the way you've organized that your study is incredible. You just everybody on this call knows you're just incredible, and I always love working with you, and I always love just meeting with you and talking through these ideas, because then I always get other ideas too. So I'm gonna just take us home if I can till up to the Q&A, and I'm really glad that your students are on, Amy, to ask questions or to even share some of their experiences so far. I will really quickly, and with only a couple of slides, go through some of the work that I've done at Southern with undergraduate students, because we are really lucky, I think, at Southern. In our Department of Public Health, we've had an undergraduate major forever. It's now accredited through CEPH, but we've had the bachelor's degree forever. And of course, as you know, a public health degree at both levels needs to have a research methods course. But my work coming into my work starting from a long time ago in my master's program, and I've already indicated how old I am. I was in my master's program 30 years ago, I guess, has always been around college students and that age group, and HIV prevention and STD prevention, condom use, responsibilities between male and female and heterosexual relationships. So I sort of took what I worked on as a master's student and brought it into my work here. So I've toyed with small projects here and there, but as I was putting this together, I realized they've all been sort of interconnected and related, and many of them have included undergrad. So I'm just going to highlight three. And I can't believe how long ago this has been, but in 2010, I got a small grant from Southern to look at sex ratios and sort of who has the responsibility in a heterosexual relationship with regards to birth control decision, birth control and condom use and decision making, who buys them, who uses them, who brings up the conversations. I know men, male condoms, female condoms. So that first project that's listed was with both men and women at Southern. And I did two voice projects, one with women and one with men. And I was talking to Amy about it this week, and really upon reflection, and I don't know why, but the photo voice project with men was a lot more fun. There was a lot less competition between the men in the photo voice project. And even the way we sort of had to recruit, it was much harder to recruit the undergrad male students. I ended up with 7, and I ended up having to work with one of our master students who was on the football team when he was an undergrad at Southern, and he recruited some of his football player friends. But then also somehow we also had sort of the other side of the coin, where we had young men who were not at all in athletics at all, but they were we used to call them geeks in high school. I don't know what they're called now, but the sort of melding together of that group was really wonderful. And I learned a lot from that project that ended up becoming a second project, which is the second one on the list. That we wanted to do surveys and follow up on some of the things we learned from these students in the Photo Voice project around, their priority, for example, prioritizing pregnancy prevention over STD prevention, which is not a unique or, aha moment in the world of STI prevention, but it was something that we wanted to pursue in another research project. So for 3 years, 2016 to 2018, I had the pleasure, sheer pleasure of working with the guys that you see on the slides here. We had a group of 5. My 5th person is not in any of these pictures, but the 4 here are all undergrads. And let me introduce you to the 4 of them. The upper right picture going clockwise from left to right. The man pointing to the poster is MJ. Marcelin, Joseph, and behind him is Woodley, and then to the right is John, and in the front in the white shirt is David. They were all undergrads. I worked with David actually all 3 years. The other 3, I worked with them for 2 years, and I had a small grant from campus. I gave them a small stipend, but they had really engaged in the topic. I think what really made this work was they really wanted to work with other men on campus and talk about condoms and safer sex. So they took the research results from the Photo Voice projects, and we sort of developed surveys. We did surveys with men on campus. which was really hard to do. Amy mentioned it before, like many universities, our population is 2/3 female and 1/3 male. So just to start out, there aren't that many men on campus. So they had to think about very creative ways to get some of the undergrad men to fill out the surveys. We did some, they were focus groups, more like community forums with some of the groups we have on campus that are men's fraternities, athletic teams. And we have a group on campus called Bros. It's a student group of men of color, and they worked with them as well. And what I want to sort of spend a little more time talking about this group, because I'm most proud about what happened, not only with the work we did, but with the gentleman in our project to begin with. So the upper right corner, the two upper right and the corner on the bottom left, the pictures on the bottom left are them presenting a poster of our research, the outcomes of our research. And I'll show the poster in a second. The survey research in particular, this was on campus. We have an undergraduate research forum that students can apply to present at. The bottom left corner is our provost and our president listening to Woodley specifically go into detail about the research and the findings, and it was about condoms, and they totally, they loved talking about it, especially to Joe and Bob. As you can see, we're super intent on their conversation. The bottom right corner picture is a national conference, the Society for Public Health Education, or the SOPHE conference. This was actually in Columbus, Ohio in 2017, maybe it was 2018. And John is there taking the lead on talking to some folks at that conference about our research. Since this project ended, David actually, as an undergrad, David did his internship as a researcher at Yale. And right now I'm blanking, I wasn't at CIRA or on STDs, but he worked with a high-level research institution. And after graduation, got an incredible job doing research. And now he's actually working at practice at the Norwalk Health Department. But John and Woodley and MJ have all gone on to pursue their master's degrees. Woodley graduated this year from Quinnipiac. He got his degree in not public health, but it's computer science, and not just computer science. I can't think of something, computer science and like social media or something. And he has a perfect personality for that. But John and MJ are in our master's program right now. And just today, and I'm not lying, I got an email from MJ because we're starting to work on an article with all these guys about this research project. MJ told me today he wants to pursue a DRPH. And I'm so excited. He's been working at GBAP in Bridgeport, and he's just completely engaged in research. He's written a couple of articles with other faculty, and he just loves it. What I want to do, Amy, is if you could move to the next slide, just quickly. I forgot to talk about the other project, but I will. These comments are comments from those 4 young men about the work that we did together. This was on the poster that we presented, because part of what I wanted to do was not only report on the research that we did, which was, basic research. Did we find anything life-changing? Not really, but it was really their participation and what they got out of it back in 2018 that I thought was really important. Look at David saying, I learned leadership skills, research skills, and the fundamentals needed to be a successful researcher. He started with me as a sophomore, and I saw him just completely grow and mature from his sophomore to his senior year. I mean, not just with research and with as a student. He decided because of this, he wanted to engage more in public health. He went to Liverpool for a semester with one of our study abroad programs in Liverpool, and he wants to pursue graduate degree, as well. MJ says, I gained valuable experience that will further my career, and definitely he's furthering it. He's getting his master's, he's going to get his doctorate. John has moved up in the ranks in different health departments in our state. He's on his way also to becoming a leader. Maybe he won't do straight up research, but I think the skills that they got of engaging those principles, Amy, that you brought up twice, that Mark talked about, community engagement. We talk about it, starting where the people are, just really understanding how we need to collect data. They really had to spend time thinking about that over and over again in the couple of years that we worked together. And I'm not taking credit, but I think I opened up the opportunity for them to really engage and embrace with what they needed and wanted to do. And it wasn't always what I thought they needed to do, right? It was really letting them, as the students, knowing other students on campus, what was the best way to, what questions to ask and what data to collect. And so it's been really, really rewarding. I want to also just backtrack a bit. I just recently finished a project, and I meant to throw this slide in and I forgot to. Three photo voice projects that I was awarded funding from the Connecticut Health Foundation to look at COVID inequities. And the research team for that included four graduate students, all students of color, and 3 community organizers who were women of color. And now one of those community organizers has become a master's student because of that work in the Photo Voice Project. But I just wrote an article, they wrote it, I facilitated the writing of the article for a special issue of Health Education and Behavior that was looking for student-authored papers. And they wrote a perspectives piece on their experience working on these Photo Voice projects. We worked on those from the beginning, sort of mid 2020 through last year. They were focused on inequity in education, kids going online in Bridgeport, housing inequities, food insecurity in New Haven, how COVID exacerbated those things. And so the paper isn't really about the findings as it is about their perspective, what they got out of doing photo voice research. And some of the things that still sort of gives me goosebumps is reading they were all MPH students. And again, one of them is a new MPH student, to see how the power of qualitative research, specifically photo voice research, helped them to understand racism, systemic racism. One of them is actually an epidemiology PhD student now. She's gone on from her MPH, and she already knew this, but just now that she knows she's learning more about quantitative research, that's even making her realize how much more important qualitative research is, because the other side of it is just understand. We all know, I'm talking to the choir, but to really see how you can hear from communities, understand their lived experiences through qualitative research like photo voice, and the power of that for them was really palpable. And they wrote about it in this article. And if it gets published, I will share it with you. It's a small perspectives article, but it's really powerful. And so I guess just to kind of wrap it up, we can put the last slide is just really the poster. It goes back to that original research with the undergraduate men. This is our Sophie poster. But to see this all come together, to have them work through it, to kind of start, with them just wanting to be a part of it, but not really knowing where this whole journey was going to go for them. And now seeing that 3 of the 4 guys have gotten their master's degrees or are about to. One of them is going to go on to get a doctorate. I neglected to mention that Woodley has actually started his own company. The one who just graduated from Quinnipiac. And it's just, it's hard to really express it's not really pride, because I don't take pride in it, but just the humility around seeing where students can go when they're allowed the space and the room to just explore their research interests and to do research with them. It has been helpful that my research, one sort of bucket of my research is college student health and health promotion on college campuses. They're very engaged with that. Amy, you talked about them coming and going, but they were with me for 2 or 3 years, and they were living on campus. At least David was, and John and MJ were. They were involved with our undergraduate public health student group. They lived on campus, so there was a lot of entry points for them on campus. So yeah, I hope that this sort of maybe helps lend a little bit of light of what it can be to work with undergrad students. There's certainly a lot of fits and starts. There's a lot of training. There's a lot of education. There's a lot of making mistakes. But I think Southern, I'm proud to say that Southern has really embraced undergraduate research. We do have every year. We have a couple grants for students to do research in the summer and get paid. to do that research. And there's always an opportunity for the undergraduates to present their research at the end of the year. And our administration is always there. And I didn't use the picture, but one of the pictures, Dr. Smoyer is in the picture with my students, being supportive of them as she always is.
But I'm glad that you highlighted that event, and I would certainly invite the people who are present in this room and others to come. We should share that with the CIRA community when those undergraduates. It's usually on a Saturday, and so it's a great way to sort of learn more about Southern and the things that are going on there. I also want to just appreciate what you shared about how there was a journal asking for student authored papers. Is actually something that I've seen kind of growing, and that's a great institutional effort there to create that space. And so that's something that we can lean into. And as we talked about with Sean, one of the major goals is this writing process. So having a goal of writing in that way is great. So so thank you for sharing those experiences it's just a unique experience where you're doing community-based research on campus about campus health. The students are actually the community, right? So that is a great synergy there. So our timing has gone very well today. So we do have some time for questions. And I know that I understand that it's kind of tricky to talk in these forums, but if anyone has any questions that they would like to put in the chat or any reflections, even if you don't have a question, if you just have something you want to say, we would really love to hear from you in the room. Maybe you have experiences working with undergrads. I mean, things that obviously we've just kind of touched on the iceberg here, and maybe some of you want to share some of your experiences, so I'm just going to be quiet and allow someone to speak up.
Well, while we're waiting, Amy, I wanted to thank you and Jean for a wonderful presentation. I think that you've really kind of broadened our perspectives about the potential to researchers and to students about a marriage and a commitment to research together.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you, Loretta. And I also just wanted to add, as you were starting to speak, I was thinking about how Sean Lang, who this project is named in honor of, she earned her undergraduate degree, I believe at Salem State. She did not have a master's degree and she didn't have a doctorate. So I think it's also thinking about the pipeline. She was so engaged in research, such a strong partner with a deep knowledge of research. So thinking about maybe the pipeline is that they go, to get advanced degrees, but also having a cadre of undergraduate students who can work, as Jean was describing, in community settings as a true partner with the researcher, because they know what's going on, right? And so they can really enter it. So I think that's the pipeline too, is having those community-based activists. And so I think that's another reason why Sean is Spirit is so appropriate for this, because she was her HIV activism, she always told the story about how it started at Salem State at the LGBT center or whatever, and talking about people in the 80s and HIV emerging. So her undergraduate education was a launching point for a lot of the things that she accomplished in her life. Sean Estelle, please, please share.
Hi, Amy. There's a part of me that's like, just don't be so excited. Just say hello. And I'm like, no, I can't. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah, and thank you.
Just introduce yourself to other people who might not, because you are
I
also. Yeah.
Yes. And I also skipped out in the middle of the breakout rooms because I'm actually in 2 Zooms at the same time. So that's what this Friday is doing.
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you both before to say that Shanna Stell and Amy are what I consider charter members of QRDG. So welcome.
T-shirt. Where's the T-shirt?
I know, right? So I'm Shanna Stell Brown. I was in the AIDS program, and that was how I found out about CIRA and all these great people. And I am now at Rollins College in Central Florida, where I primarily teach undergrads. And then I'm also a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow working on HIV prevention. So my question to you, Amy, is actually about the R15, because I'm just really curious, because I participated for the first time this past year on a review panel, and I can't remember if they had an R15 or not, but I wonder, I guess, what was the reception that you could feel from the summary statement to this kind of work? Because it's certainly on the nose and it's needed, and I'm glad that you got funded. And I think even just learning from you will pave the way for, you know, my own work in NIH grants that are fitting this kind of mechanism. But I guess what I wonder was, did you, I don't know, what was your experience of actually like putting this up and like getting the feedback?
Yeah, okay, so thank you for asking that question, because it was actually something I meant to speak about earlier. So this grant, let me just say, was incredibly successful. I was funded the first time that I applied, okay? And the reason why that happened is because of CIRA, okay? So I had the opportunity as a CIRA affiliated scientist to bring a draft of this project to a panel of peer review scientists who were Ashley, Trace, Jamie, so generous in their time and expertise, really, really reading that document, giving me very, very explicit, helpful feedback, which I went back and wrote, integrated, whatever, and then, okay, hold on to your hats, I sent it back to all of them, and they did that again. You know, so I don't know how to express my gratitude for that, to get to, so by the time I got to the NIH peer review, I'd already had the NIH peer review, you know, because I had this incredible group of researchers, NIH funded researchers helping me. So, so I didn't get a lot of pushback on the qualitative piece of it. I'm trying to remember. There was one kind of point. I honestly, I can't even remember. You know what I mean? So I guess what I'm saying is they were like super open to it, you know, and I think, you know, the COVID thing, you know, was kind of catchy, you know, because that is that intersection of COVID and HIV. Also, I think we know, I was recently at the annual conference of social workers in HIV. Also, we saw in the bridge, that bridge, if you haven't seen that video, that was like a CIRA presentation from this Boston medical group about HIV and drug use in Boston. Unfortunately, the crisis of HIV among people who inject drugs has come back. I guess it was never gone, but it was declining. And we've seen during COVID, this rearing its ugly head again, right? So I think there's a renewed interest in working with people who, and just sort of seeing that problem as not solved and as needing further attention. And then, you know, with the criminal justice issue. So I guess what I would say is that I got very positive feedback about the grant. And I think it was from the feedback I got from the group, which I think the peer review really helps you in telling the story of what you're, you know, to me, a grant is about telling the story about who you are and what you hope to do, especially the R15. And so I think having outside eyes looking at it, they can kind of see where the story doesn't make sense, or you're jumping around or different things. And so I think also that through the peer review process, Jamie Meyer agreed to be a consultant on the project. And I think that helped a lot too, in that, to the extent that it's a qualitative project, to have a real like powerhouse doctor, quantitative, awesome HIV prison person. I think that really strengthened the application too. And I think also Southern strengthened the application, because Southern tells a really compelling story about who our students are and the potential there. So I think that was another strength of the application, was Southern, and as Jean has described, the ways in which we have set intentions around engaging undergraduate students. Maybe we haven't realized all that, but we've, you know, making it a priority. So I think the part about the institution was very compelling as well. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Amy, I've got a follow-on question to Shanna Stells. First of all, which institute ultimately funded this?
NIDA. So it's a NIDA grant. So it is that focus on women who use drugs.
Okay. And then I also wanted to clarify to people, although I think most of the people who are in this session are HIV researchers, to clarify that, first of all, the QRDG does not run the peer review, that is another branch of CIRA. And I think that basically that service is really for HIV grounded research, so that just people know that while it's a wonderful resource, it's not part of QRDG, and we don't want to step on the peer review toes. And it's got to be something HIV related for the CIRA to do the peer review.
So anything else you wanted to share, Shanna Stells, about your adventures mentoring undergraduates in research? Or, I mean, I feel like you have a unique perspective being at a small liberal arts college, and I don't know, it's a different perspective.
Well, I mean, I guess for me, like being at a teaching focused institution, I think sometimes bringing in the research, it's sometimes easier said than done. I mean, I'm in the Department of Anthropology. I coordinate the global health program, but it's almost like for us as faculty members, the research is secondary. And so I love the idea of, creating a pipeline for students. I mean, the one thing that I've been thinking about, even just recently is like, how do you provide access to so many different careers rather than students being like, I'm interested in health, therefore I need to be a doctor or a nurse, right? Because it's so much broader than that, right? And especially if you're interested in research, there are many, many ways to get to that in a interdisciplinary way, in a multidisciplinary way. And there's just not that kind of exposure. And so for me, I think my projects are not necessarily those that I could easily have students work on those projects, but I do see the benefit of showing students what this kind of research looks like, right? Or what qualitative research looks like, or what health research looks like, or HIV research. I mean, I see a lot of value in that. I mean, in teaching, undergrads research methods, it's all very abstract until they actually find a way to use it. One thing I can also say is that a lot of our students are, they become interested in research sometimes late, I think, in their undergrad careers. And so it's like junior and then maybe even senior year. But, I've had some really great stars, come across my path and have gone on to, Truman scholarships and Fulbright and things like that. So it can happen. It's just that it feels very kind of few and far between.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's hard with the central, when the central goal is to teach. And that's what I think is great about the R15 is really when I was developing this grant with the dean and the chair of my department, really presenting it to them as a teaching initiative, right? So that they to try to show that it would support our larger mission, not be a whole other different thing. But yeah. So, and I think that question about what year they start is also really interesting. In our Sean group, we have actually one first-year student, one second-year student, and then juniors, mostly juniors and seniors. But it's exciting to have some of these earlier students as well. Just, it's nice to have the combination. The juniors and seniors also awesome. But and also just thinking about the ways, because our school has undergraduate and graduate programs for students that stay, are there ways, and I think Jean talked about that, about having a master's student working with the undergrad. So seeing how we can go across those different educational, that's an advantage that I guess you don't have masters in. Also, I mean, Dr. Meyer, Jamie Meyer, was an anthropology undergrad. So she's a great example of a researcher who has that liberal arts degree.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's kind of one of the problems that you see in STEM, right? Is that there's a lot of paternalism that comes up, that, you know, you have a student who is a biology major, but they can't become a biologist until they do more work later, right? Or that there's a student who is learning chemistry, but they can't become a chemist, right? Until they graduate from that program and go on to something else. So, and then there's also just this kind of feeling that undergraduates can't do things when they absolutely can, because they're fully capable adults, right, who are still in this like learning process. And so I think it becomes really important to figure out like what is appropriate at their level, and then showing them what they can do, and then assessing them on that, right, showing them what they, you know, some sort of really great research thing that they can do, and then watching them do it.
Yeah, and I think one of the great features about anthropology, social work, maybe public health, other disciplines, is that a lot of our classes actually teach qualitative research skills, right? So we teach interviewing and stuff. So there is a nice overlap where some of the students are developing those skills as part of their curriculum and their academic curriculum. So it's, but I really like what you're saying about like, when do we allow people to call themselves a researcher? And I think that's a really, I think being generous with that and just being like, yeah, like we're all researchers, and like allowing people to really start telling that narrative, and because I think it is a lot about how you imagine yourself. And so we do have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if anyone else has a question they would like to share. Now we've heard from Florida, which is exciting to have our global Zoom room here, international, national. Any other thoughts on this project?
Jean, were you going to say something?
I was just going to pop in and say another way to engage students with research, especially at teaching institutions, is maybe having a class that's an applied research class with them after they've taken a research class, and you know, have them do either a campus-based project or a community-based project. I know it's not a lot of time, but it could be a way to get to springboard them into something else. You know, Amy and I taught an honors class this spring, which was sort of like that. I mean, they didn't have to do the research, but they had to do a research proposal, and it was really enlightening to see them be able to kind of work through coming up with a research question and doing literature reviews. Just another thought for those of us who do a lot of teaching.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was thinking about your, you know, what you offer at Southern is that you are planting the seed very early on of what it is to do community-based research, and get an appreciation of the time and energy that is involved in establishing. I think that's really something fabulous to learn early on in your research career.
Yeah, yeah. Karen, did you have something you wanted to share? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Of course, sorry. Yeah, just quickly, I just wanted to highlight the way that we teach research classes. So I think, Amy, your development of a flipped classroom for a research methods course with a clear and purposeful anti-oppressive theme is really valuable, because as an undergraduate student, I was not interested in research because I did not understand that research could be used as a tool for anti-oppressive practice. I didn't understand how it could be used for a tool for policy or social change. And I think that that's another avenue that I think maybe could be emphasized, or you can share resources around how to better engage students in research at the class level when they're in these mandated courses that frankly, not too many folks are excited to take. So.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for bringing that up. Karen and I both teach the undergraduate research methods class in the social work department, and we've developed this open access course with Matt DiCarlo's book, which is a open access research, social work research, but could be used in public health as well. I guess so I do want to put in a plug for that. Thanks, Karen, that it's a wonderful book and it's all open access. So if you're interested, I could send you the websites, but basically the collaboration with Matt and other people who use this book has created this cloud-based resource where you can get the syllabus, the assignment. So it's his book. And then we created a class, and other people have also, it's not just Karen and me. stuff to go with his book, right? And so adopting his book, we're also going to give you the syllabus, the assignments, and the activities. We teach it flipped, we teach it, it's all interactive experiential learning, and that's founded in anti-racism interrogation and practices. So in any event, we're happy to, the whole point of it is open access. So if you teach undergraduate research methods, call us and we can hook you up with the Matt's book. And and it's also, the other thing is, like, when you have a free book for undergraduates, when you're like, hi, welcome to this class, there's no book you have to buy for this class. That right there is meeting people where they are and making them love your class. So these are things that can help engage people in the research project. So so I think we're out of time, Loretta, but I really appreciate everyone who came today, and I hope you won't hesitate to reach out to me or Jean or anyone. And I hope to see you at future QDWG meetings.
It's QRDG.
I can never keep it straight. Thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate all of you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all